Tulip, who's got a cadaver there, who died that morning, by the way. He was hung because he was a criminal, and Dr. Tulip arranged to buy the body fresh, for his dinner show, because the people that attended this were there for dinner, but at the same time, he's the show, and he's dissecting the corpse and showing people, how he thinks this body works and so on. And there's a whole book about it. You could actually read about that anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulip. That's kind of neat. But Descartes was in the audience for that. Wasn't one of the ones depicted in the painting, but he was there because, of course, he was very interested in all of this kind of stuff. And they're trying to learn things. And in fact, there's also, I don't want to break anything here. Descartes is the one that found the pineal gland.
Oh.
It's kind of famous. And drew, pictures of where he found it. This is actually a drawing by Descartes, I believe. Or this, get the idea. And that tells me that he was also dissecting people, because how else are you going to find a pineal gland unless you're digging into a body? And I suppose, remember that how long is he going to live in that house? It's a nasty job, but somebody has to do it, right? So in any case, the funny thing, though, is he ends up concluding that the pineal gland, which is at the very base of the top of the spine, base of the brain, it's the very center he thinks of. And as a result, he thinks that is the place where the soul interacts with the body. And that's one of the interesting things about Descartes, is he's considered a mind-body dualist. I mentioned this. A.C. Grayling talks about this too, because he's famous for being a mind-body dualist. What does that mean? Well, he believes that the mind is us. That's our soul, basically, and it interacts with the body. And the body, for him, is a machine. He's looking at these different dissections, and he's concluding that that the body is basically a machine, and machines are a new thing. The way they're making them, the clocks are new. They have these huge clocks. If you had a chance to see the movie Mind Walk, which I think, didn't I advertise that? Mind Walk? I didn't.
Mind Walk.
Mind Walk. One word. It's a movie. It's on it's free on YouTube. You might have to watch commercials, but in any case, it's based on a book by it's called the Turning Point, and it's a book by Fritjof Capra. And what it's about is the way science has changed from the Cartesian point of view, which is, of course, Descartes, the mechanistic universe, to our contemporary one. So that's the turning point. And it's because now we have an organic view of the universe instead of like a machine. Everything is being thought of in terms of like an oak tree. It's organic and interconnected. Whereas machines, all the parts are like, they're isolated and they work together, but they don't mesh. They don't live on one another, in the way that, we think of, the life does, right? So that early part is the mechanistic universe that's kind of Descartes. And in that movie, the physicist Sonia Hoffman, she's all thrilled. Well, I don't hate Descartes. Descartes was wonderful. They're good actors, so it's neat. But in any case, this is new, that the idea that the body is a machine. Animals he thought of too, of course, as machines. And it's kind of famous that he thought that animals don't have souls. They're just machines. And he didn't even think that they had pain, actually. I don't understand how that could be the case. Killing an animal, I'm pretty sure they're pretty sad about that. And it's pretty painful. However, Descartes famously didn't think animals had souls. Remember, Aquinas does, actually, because Aristotle thinks, there's a soul in a plant, basically. It's the activity of, the life. But Descartes does think that we're machines. And in fact, I want to mention this is my quiz question for today. And it makes more sense when we talk more about Thomas Hobbes, too, because between the two of them, they're both influenced by Galileo Galilei. And my quiz question is, which one of the two of them do you think was more influenced? Descartes or Hobbes? And by the way, that's one of those quiz questions where you're not going to be wrong no matter who you pick, because both of them are kind of obviously possible. I mean, there's plenty of grounds for saying that Hobbes was influenced. Hobbes actually visited Galileo. Descartes never did. But nonetheless, both of them are going to be very influenced in Galileo's physics. And so Descartes, in thinking and being influenced by Galileo, does a book called The Traits of the World. And he's about ready to publish it when he finds out that Galileo's in trouble for Galileo's books. And so, remember, Galileo ended up in house arrest and all that. And so Descartes decides not to publish. And so his book doesn't come out, although all the parts of it eventually come out as separate things. So that's it's not totally lost. But he was afraid. He didn't want to get in trouble because people were still being burned at the stake. That's kind of a nasty way to go. Having your head chopped off was considered to be a better way. It was more, if you're royalty, you get your head chopped off. If you're, a typical, like William Wallace, wow, you're drawn and quartered and burned and, anything they could think of to make life miserable for you as it ends, But, so, for Descartes, the body is like a machine. And yet at the same time, being a Catholic and not wanting to get in too much trouble with the church, or the Protestants for that matter, the soul is us, and the soul is, well, what's the soul do if the body is a complete machine, that does everything all on its own? Aha! Well, the soul interconnects with the body through the pineal gland for Descartes. So we have the pineal gland. The interesting thing, of course, and this is Antonio Damasio, who is a 90-year-old neurophysicist today, who just wrote a new book, by the way, on feeling and thinking, or feeling and consciousness, something like that. But in any case, one of his early books, maybe his first one, is Descartes' Error. Descartes' Error. And the point of the book is Descartes was wrong in thinking that the soul is completely immaterial and yet interacts with the body through the pineal gland. That gives you the mind-body problem. And of course, this also is called the ghost in the machine. you know. And how does a ghost interact with a machine? You know, you think of a person who's a quadruple amputee sitting in a stick shift automobile and trying to drive it. You know, how you know, that's terrible, but you know, you get the idea. How on earth would something interact with, you know, something else when the one is physical and the other is completely spiritual or non-physical? How on earth would that happen? And yet, apparently Descartes argued that. Now, my personal thinking is that he didn't really believe it. He thought that the body was just completely mechanical. And by the way, Thomas Hobbes does as well, right? So both of them are convinced that the body is like a complete machine. In fact, Thomas Hobbes will argue that we don't have a soul. Instead, what we have is all these motions. Remember Galileo and the idea of motions that, you know, when you... who's the one that most influenced Sir Isaac Newton? Perhaps Descartes was the one that influenced him most. But it could have also been Francis Bacon, who knows who he was reading. But in any case, the idea of motions will continue on unless something stops them, right? You know, and as a result, for Hobbes, while we're interacting with other things, and he's obviously dissecting bodies too, and he thought the nerves were like hollow tubes that air pressure, you know, so when you touch something, the pressure on your fingers is communicated through the air in the tubes to the brain and creates a motion, so that the motion causes motions in the brain, and that for Hobbes, all these motions going around with nothing to stop them, as far as he knew, in the brain, you know, so the motions from, you know, things hitting my ears, right, go into my brain. The things hitting my eyes, and I remember reading his book. His book is called The Leviathan. He's got several, but The Leviathan is the most important one. Leviathan means like the big fish, a huge fish. And if you look at the cover of Hobbes's book, The Leviathan, it's a picture of a monarch with a sword. Picture of the cover of Hobbes's book, and it's a king, you know, with his implements, but if you looked at his body, what you'd see is a whole bunch of little people. The Leviathan. So the state is, like Plato said, man writ large, in a sense, right? But for Hobbes, when we're looking at something, particles from the object fly into our eyes. And so the motions of those particles flying into our eyes continue on into our brain, and that's gives us this memory of those things that we saw. And I remember reading that and thinking, what the heck is he thinking? Particles flying into our eyes? And then it dawned on me, photons. That's exactly how we describe it today, although we don't say particle. Well, we do say photons are light particles, right? You know, so it's not like little bits of the chair flying into my eye. It's the light. So Hobbes doesn't really get the whole picture, so to speak, but he's en route. You know, he's on the way, and he thinks of all the things that go into our brain as motions. So for Hobbes, our psychology is all these motions that are picked up through motions that influence our senses, right? I don't recall Descartes talking about that at all. So for Descartes, there's this interconnection between what was called a homunculus. Type Descartes homunculus. Still got the pineal gland here. But notice we also got some images of a brain with a person sitting in a chair in the middle of the brain, looking at a screen. So what this is a kind of comical, attempt to, what's Descartes thinking? That there's like this little homunculus, a little person, sitting in our brain. That's